Okay, so now we've looked at frameworks, we're going to actually download the Foundation 5 framework. And we're going to download this essential package. So over from the Foundation homepage at foundation.zurb.com, we're going to click download Foundation 5. And you can see we've got a couple of different options here. So the complete version will give you all of the CSS and all of the JavaScript that build up certain components to this framework. So for example, the navigation elements, etc., etc. Now, we've also got the Essential package, which is the one that we're going to be downloading. So here it says a simple, lighter version that includes the typography, which is pretty important, the grid, buttons, reveal and interchange, which are both JavaScript features of the framework, which we're not going to be looking at all. Now, we've also got the ability to custom download this, so you could in fact choose how many columns you wanted. You could choose the gutter size, the maximum width of the container. You can choose pretty much anything you want to here. But what we're going to do is we're going to leave this as it is. Now, you can also download the Sass source for this. Basically, Sass is a preprocessor, CSS preprocessor. Because what you will see is the code that's spat out into the Essential pack you download isn't what the developers on Foundation 5 have written. They will have written it in Sass and then compiled it to CSS. You can read more about Sass, just head over to Google and Google for Sass. So what I've done is I've downloaded the Foundation Essentials package here, and we've got quite a bit in here, but we're not going to be using all of this. All we're going to be doing here is we're going to be copying over just the CSS files here. So if we were to just copy this min and the normalize.css, and we'll talk a little bit about this in just a moment, I'm going to copy this, and we're going to head over to my document area, and inside of the website folder, I'm going to paste these into my CSS directory. So that's all we need. That's all we need. We've installed essentially Foundation as a framework. So we need to include these in. I'm going to change the name of this style sheet to custom. So let's change the name of that to custom. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to install, or include rather, Foundation here. So style sheet css/foundation.min.css, and we'll talk about what min means in just a second. And just before that, we're going to include normalize. So I've got two things to talk about here. One is what normalize is, and one, what a minified version of a style sheet means. So normalize.css. Okay, so we've included both these files. Let's take a look at normalize here. And you'll notice that all it's really doing is it's defaulting things like the margin on the body. It's resetting or removing things. So all of these elements here, it's setting as a display block. It's just to correct issues here for certain browsers. And we've also got things like corrections for audio, canvas, progress. Canvas is an HTML element which you can interact with JavaScript. Audio will just give you audio, video, the same thing. And there's certain other things here. So we've got an anchors background of transparent to remove the grey background from active links in IE10. There's various things in here that will just be fixed across certain browsers. So it's a really good idea to include this normalized style sheet. And this isn't part of Foundation 5. It's a globally available piece of CSS that can be used in isolation as well as along with your favorite framework. Now we've also got foundation.min.css, and you'll see that this is all on one line. If I just turn on text wrapping in my browser, let's just add this in, you can see that this just is, I mean, really a mess if you look at it like this. If we head over to the Foundation download, we would be able to actually find the non-minified version. But what the minified version in production means is that you can actually see all of the the minified version is what would be compressed, removing spaces, line breaks, anything like that, just to reduce the file size when it's downloaded. So if we just refresh the page now, there's not really much difference. If we check the network tab, we're obviously loading in a couple of extra files here. We've also got a custom style sheet that we can add custom styles into. So if we wanted to style a header or something like that, we could do. So now that we've installed Foundation, what we're going to do is we're going to build a fairly complicated website structure, and we'll be building this out, and then afterwards what we'll then do is make it so it's responsive. I mean, it's going to be responsive by default, but we'll make it responsive in terms of it looking a lot better on a smaller device. So here is our basic document. Don't forget to add your meta viewport tag as well up here. I'm not going to add it now, but you'll want to do that to go ahead and test on a smaller device, just so it renders correctly. So I'll leave that out on purpose, just so you can go and refer to that and add that back in yourself. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start to look at the rows and columns within Foundation, and then we'll start to build our layout. So we create an element, a div basically with a class of row, and then inside of here we're going to create columns. So let's look at a very basic example. We're going to say left and we're going to say right. So for the left we need so on a large viewport we want this to take up 6 columns of the 12 columns that are available. Obviously that's half, and we need to add this columns class in here as well. So large 6 columns. So this is essentially 50% each way, and there we go. So you can see that the typography's changed and the default size of the text has changed. This is fine, we can use this for our website. You'll notice that the row automatically has 100% width, it has a margin left of auto, which we've done before, and it has a max width as well. We've already done this throughout this series, looking at centering a container, but the only difference here really is that the rows use a max width of in M units rather than in pixels or in anything else. So we've got our row now, we've got our column here and our column here. How much easier was that to lay out within Foundation rather than doing it ourselves? And you'll also note that when I pull this in, you can see that this responds by pulling, if I just get rid of this because it makes it a bit slower, you can see it responds by pushing itself downwards like that. Now what I'm actually going to do is, in my custom style sheet, I'm going to target all elements on the page. You wouldn't want to do this in production, it's slow, and it obviously what we're about to do isn't going to look very nice. But I'm going to say box sizing border box, just in case that was interfere. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a border of 1 pixel and dashed as black. There we go. Now the reason I've done this is because when we learn, it's much easier to see the constraints of what we're doing and see where everything's positioned. Now the border around the outside of the page is the body, and here you can see that we've got the row and we've got columns inside. So we have a border around the row here, and we have, actually we probably don't have a border around here. We do, but it's not showing. We have border around the columns. So that just goes to show that we can actually sort of define what we're looking for. In actual fact, we might just want to say columns like that, and that might just look a little bit neater. So we've got our left and our right here. We understand how this sort of works. Let's take a little dive into looking at the responsive side of this. So if I was to say, well, on a medium screen or on a medium viewport, I also want this to be a 6 column. We just add the class in there. It's as simple as that. So when I pull this inwards, what's going to happen here is it's going to stay like that until it gets to the small viewport about there. So let's take a look at how this is actually working. So basically, if we were to right click and inspect this, and we were to go down, we've got these little at things here. You might recognize these from when we did at font face. And basically what this is, it's a media query. Now, a media query is something that allows you to target a specific viewport and a specific viewport size, and then apply styles based on that. So in this case, what we're doing is we're saying media only screen and the minimum width at 64.063 ems. The large 6 class has a width of 50%, which we know it's half of the grid. Now what's going to happen is when we come down a little bit further to the medium, you'll see this other thing pop up. In fact, let's find, should be down here somewhere. Yeah, there we go. So we've got a minimum width of 40.063. Now we've got medium 6 instead. You see how these media queries pop up when we change our viewport size. It's gone from large there to medium if you keep an eye on this area. So this is basically how the styles know how to change when you have different viewport sizes. And this will also work on smaller devices, tablets, mobiles, whatever, you know, anything like that. So what we can then do is we can say, well, on a small device, I just want it to all the way down to small, stack underneath each other. So we've already created a responsive design easily with Foundation. And the understanding behind how these classes work with media queries is fairly straightforward. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to build our basic page layout, and we'll look at how quickly we can actually do this. So let's, like before, create a header element. And inside of here, we're going to have a row. So we create a div here with a class of row. And let's say on my header, I wanted to have just one row, basically, one column in here. So I'm going to create a div with a class of large 12 columns. And I'm going to say this is the header. So now with the header, I can give this an ID of site header. And in the custom style sheet, I can say site header. Remember, this here is for testing purposes, so I'm just going to comment this for testing only. So for the site header, we want a background of slate grey, for example. And there we go. So we've got our header, which has sort of been created above here. But you'll notice that the rows always have this predefined width, which is really useful because regardless of how far out an element comes, like this header, you always want your content in the center of the page to be aligned perfectly down the page. It just looks a lot nicer. And this is another benefit of grid systems. They help you to lay things out in a more structured way, and they just look generally a lot better. So let's do the same thing for a footer as well. So down here, let's create a footer element. But for the footer element, I'm not going to give this a background. So I'm just going to say ID site footer. And for example, I might want to say site footer border top, I don't know, 2 pixels solid and like a CCC or something like that. So there we go. We've got a nice little grey line there, but we can see that in a minute when we push the content down. So let's create a row in here. So I'm not going to create a sort of main wrapper. These are all generic wrappers, and there's nothing really wrong with this. So I'm going to create a row in the middle, and this is going to be a sort of top feature area. So let's say you come onto a website and you've got 1, 2, 3 items at the top, which are basically just giving you like images or information or something like that. So what I'm also going to do to columns is I'm going to say I want them to have a minimum height, and this is again for testing purposes, of 100 pixels. And that will just expand everything out for us just so we can sort of see it in a more real way. So we're going to have a large 4 columns. So this is feature 1. And we're going to duplicate this down. So feature 2, feature 3. Like so. And when we refresh, there we go. So we've already got something that's looking really nice. Everything's nicely lined up. You'll notice the text is really nicely lined up here as well. And of course, if we just pull this in, it is responsive. Now, we're going to deal with the responsive side of this towards the end of the video. But let's go ahead and, I'll just get rid of the console there. Let's go ahead and create a main a sidebar and then a main content area. So let's do that now. All we need to do is create a new row. Simple as that. We already are sort of getting used to the syntax of this now. So we create a new row just here. And in here we say div class, and in here we're going to say large. Let's just literally pick any number. We'll just say 3, for example. So I'm going to say sidebar. And in fact, I could call this a side. We'll leave that out for now. And down here we want the main content area, and that's going to be 9, because 9 add 3 is 12. So main content. So when I refresh now, we forgot to add the columns class to these, like so, and there we go. Lovely. So we've got a nice sidebar here, nice main content. So in the main content, let's fill this up with an article. So let's create an article here, and let's create a header 1 and just say this is an article. That will change this to a header 3. And in here, let's create a paragraph with some lorem ipsum in. And we'll do the same here with some lorem ipsum in. And we'll do it a third time. Ipsum. Okay, so there is our article. There is our sidebar. There's our feature 1, 2, and 3 at the top. Let's now focus on the actual footer. Now I want a little bit of spacing under my main content area. I can either add some margin on top of my footer, so I could do margin top 20 pixels, or I could wrap the entire main content area in a class like the following. So I could say wrapper or something like that. Then I can go all the way down and I can say like that, indent this. So we've essentially got a wrapper here in between our footer and our header, and then in that wrapper contains all the rows that we've already just looked at. And then I could do something like wrapper margin bottom 20 pixels. So it depends on what you want to do. I'll leave this one in instead of doing a margin top on the site footer. So now we have a little bit of margin down there, because remember our wrapper, if we just inspect this, contains that whole blue area there, which if we just come down a little bit you can see. And now we can do our footer. So I'm going to have, say, a larger area here, then I'm going to have 2 small areas here with unordered lists in, maybe like footer links or something like that. So let's create a div here with a class of row, because we're creating a new row. Remember, you'll use these over and over again. So we have a div here with a class of large 6. Let's say it takes up half of that size. And this is going to be a little h4, and it's going to be about my website. And then down here, we're going to have a paragraph with some lorem ipsum in. So now we have the following about my website down here on the footer. In actual fact, let's do an h5 for this, just to make it a little bit smaller. Okay, there we go. So now what we want is, we've created 6, so we can have another 3 and another 3 here to fill up the entire 12. So let's do that now. So we'll create a div with a class here of large 3 columns, and we will do exactly the same down here. A div here with a class of large 3 columns. And then in here, let's do an unordered list and a list item in here. And let's create an anchor in here, just saying about. And we could do something like cookie policy. And we could do something like contact us. And then we can just duplicate this, put that there, double the content in there, and then just, well, we'll leave it as that just for an example. So what we're looking at now is something that we've just styled out. We've not had to write really a lot of CSS at all. The only thing that we're writing CSS for is to control a lot of the testing here, and also just a little bit of background on there, a bit of spacing there. So now we have a really nice structure to this page, a really solid structure that's going to work across different devices. Obviously, at the moment, this is a little bit odd, because what's happened is when we pull it into a smaller viewport, we haven't added classes on to tell Foundation CSS what behavior we expect when we're on these smaller viewports. So at the moment, it's just stacking all of the columns, underneath each other. So for example, on a medium viewport, I want feature 1, feature 2, and feature 3 to be still next to each other. So let's tackle that one first. So we've got feature 1, feature 2, and feature 3. On a large 4, on the large viewport, we have 4. So on a medium viewport, we also want 4. So medium 4, medium 4, medium 4. So now when I refresh the page, they stay up there like they do on a large. So we're just dictating how many columns these take up, basically. You can already see how easy this is. So as I pull inwards, I want, say, feature 1 to be 50% width here, feature 2 to be 50% width, and then feature 3 to just be full width underneath. You know, it's an example, but it could be the case. So on a small, I want it to be 6. On a small, I want this one to be 6. But on a small, I want this one to be 12. So it's saying take up 50% here, 50% up here. Obviously, 50 add 50 is 100% of the width. 6 add 6 is 12, so we have no more room. So we just do a small 12, which will give us the following. Feature 1 here is 50%, feature 2 here is 50%, e.g. 6 and 6, and then feature 3 down here is 12, e.g. 100%. So the sidebar here for this article, we can just leave above there. I'm not too worried about that. We could do some additional media queries in here just to, learn about, just to change some bits around, or we could even hide it and have some kind of JavaScript drop down. Wouldn't recommend it. But we're not going to get too much into actual responsive design theory. We've then got about my website, and to be honest, these links could sit next to each other. So you can probably guess what we already want to do here. We want to say medium 6, medium 3. In fact, no, we could do medium 6, like so, and that would give us the following. If we just pull this out a little bit. So normally these would collapse at a medium, but these are now medium 6. When we pull into small, we still want these to be next to each other because we're wasting a lot of space here. So all we need to do is we need to say small 6, small 6, like that. And there we go. So we have basically, in a very, very little time and with very little effort, built a responsive layout for a very basic website. It's so simple just to do this and just put it all together. Then you can add anything you want inside of these containers. This is the essential components of a grid system, really. Let's just remove the testing that we did earlier. In fact, we'll just remove the body here. So let's get rid of the border. Let's get rid of the border, and let's get rid of that as well. So we'll keep the minimum height just to demonstrate the pitch. And there we go. So you can imagine as you start to fill up everything that you need, this is now going to look really cool, and it responds down really nicely. So that is how we build a website structure with a grid system. You can really just play around with any grid system. I'd highly recommend you go and find a grid system that you think looks nice. You could find one perhaps even simpler than Foundations. Have a play around with it. Look at which ones you prefer working with. But be careful that some are perhaps not as well suited as you might think. There have been a lot of grid systems that have been discontinued with development because they follow some older practices and bad practices. But either way, this is a grid system. We've built a really simple layout here with Foundation, and that's how easy it is.